So ball roll back, a lot of sort of hysteria about this in the golf business at the moment, or I guess the world of golf. I guess there's a lot of people are still debating whether it's necessary to regulate the golf ball and to regulate equipment generally. My view on it is that yes, the golf ball should be regulated. The golf ball should be higher spinning. It should be softer. That therefore it would mean that players couldn't swing with impunity with the driver. They would have to control spin. It would put a premium on shot making again, and would bring back an aspect of the game which has kind of been lost. And I think the thing to remember with this is that if you consider, the big jump, which is Pro V1 coming out in, I think it was about 2000 when Pro V1 first came out. So I remember that. I was assistant pro at that time. I remember hitting drives that were going about 20 yards further. The reason that Pro V1 went further is just purely because it was a bit harder and because it spun a lot less off the driver, which was very good for good ball strikers, for pros and for good players. For average players, it's sometimes debatable because many times there's not. An average player actually needs a little bit more spin with the driver just to keep the ball in the air for longer. So the Pro V1 wasn't good for everyone, and it was it is and remains a really good example of why this thing of play what the pros play hasn't necessarily been a good thing for most golfers. And I think hopefully what might happen is through all of this there might be a bit of a shift away from that. I think us sort of weekend golfers might start to think of ourselves as around the fact that we play the game for enjoyment, and the fact that we shouldn't be playing exactly the same equipment as the pros. And I personally don't have a major problem with bifurcation, but the key thing from in my view is that you can't do it all with the ball. We've done previous videos which show that sometimes with a lower compression ball, slower ball speeds, slower swing speeds can actually hit their mid-irons much better, but with lower spin, and Pro V1 actually spins a bit more for them on the mid-irons and all that sort of thing. But the key thing is, if you were to reduce the compression of the ball, if you were to make the ball into a higher spinning ball, the average golfer would benefit, and Dustin Johnson and the really big hitters on tour would lose a little bit. That is an absolute fact, but it's people are very reluctant to say that because it really goes against this marketing message that has been played out over all of these years, which are that you should play what the pros play. So I think that's a really crucial thing. And one of the things that came out as soon as the RNA and the USGA made the announcement was that obviously the manufacturers jumped in. From the manufacturer's perspective, they take a short-term view over golf, so they care about their profits over the next 3 to 5 years. So what happens is the manufacturers will jump on this and they want to stop it. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong or anything like that. All that they want to do is stop this from happening. And then you've got the pros who sometimes, aren't actually, I think people think of the pros as people that know a huge amount about golf. They're not always, and they really are mouthpieces for the manufacturers. So the pros will all come out against this. The reality is, the rule that's been brought in reduces the driving distance under certain circumstances for the absolute longest players on tour. So people with 125 miles an hour of club speed plus. The longest hitters on tour. It will reduce their distance by 5 yards. It will have no effect whatsoever on the average golfer. They won't even notice. They can use tour balls, continue to use tour balls, and they won't even notice. But one of the things that Titleist came out and said is they said the RNA and the USGA are winding the ball back to where it was when the Pro V1 first came out. So that got me thinking, I'm going to see if I can find some original Pro V1s, and we'll do a little zoom in on this later, and you can look this up on Titleist website. But this is how the writing on the side of the original Pro V1 looked. It says Pro V1 392. You can look this up on their website. All of the markings are laid out on their website. I remember when this ball came out. I've managed to get a few of them off eBay. Look, obviously they're very old. I haven't pre-done this test, so I don't know what the results are going to be. They're very old. They've been sat around for a while. They probably are a bit depleted. And then I've just got a up-to-date Pro V1. These have got our markings on that we use for our max out launch monitor, which we've used here before. We're not using the sim just because the sim works better with the black and white marks on the board. I can't put those on manually. The sim's accurate enough to do it for sure. So let's see what we find. We'll just hit, the test that we're going to do is one that we always do for bulls. We manufacture bulls through Sounder, so we do a lot of bull testing, actually it's a slightly cut down version of that test. They're going to hit a few sort of 3/4 wedge shots with a 56-degree wedge, just looking to see what the spin's coming out like. Then we'll hit some 7 irons to see how it performs on those, and then we'll finish up with some drivers. So let's see what we find. Just trying to get the ball speed on these. Struck cleanly, 72 to 75. One, couple more. A good one with the up-to-date Pro V, 9,200 spin. 9,200 spin, 32.5 launch angle. The old Pro V1, averaging 74.9, average of 9,400 spin and 32.5 launch angle. So, you know, if you take into account the variable of me, you know, if you don't take into account the variable of me, the old Pro V1 actually spins more on a kind of 3/4 56-degree pitch shot, but if you take into account the variable of me, then there's no difference. So that's interesting, isn't it? Okay, 7 irons. Okay, pretty solid ball speeds within 1.5 miles an hour, all dead straight. So 120 ball speed, 6,200 spin, 20-degree launch for me on the 7 bat. That's with the standard, the new Pro V1, up-to-date Pro V1. Goes the other. Hey. So there's one dodgy one in there, which is the 115, so I'm going to delete that one. Average 120 ball speed again, 6,886 average spin. Spin only varied on those shots, so we went 6,800, 7,000, 6,800, so you can see I'm hitting it pretty consistently without wanting to blow my own trumpet. About, I mean, 6,700, 120, 6,700 on the new Pro V1, 120, 6,800 on the old Pro V1. So far, we can conclude, I hate to say it, don't want to get taken to court or anything, but it is true. So far we can conclude that this story, every year, oh, we've improved it, it's that much better, they're winding it back to 1997, is maybe not quite accurate. Let's see what we get with the driver. Oh, rip that. toe. Hammered. Right, so I've hit 5 shots there. One was a complete miss hit, and one was a little bit of a miss hit, just out the heel, so the spin was a bit high. They're all straight, but I'm going to delete the 2 worst ones and keep the 3 best ones. Don't need to hit loads of balls for these tests. For some reason I've picked up a bit of yardage. Found it on the sofa. Top of face. That'll probably do. So hot. Yeah, I mean I've hit those okay. I've got 4 good ones. That one came out a bit higher on the spin. So average set 5 was the new Pro V1. New Pro V1. I did get this out. These couple of outliers which were quite ripped. So 163. Couple at 163. So that made my average 162. 2,500. RPMs, 12.5 launch, I mean that's bloody perfect. 277, 307 average. With the old Pro V1, I averaged 160, 2,800, 13 degree launch, 271 and 298. So based on that test, I have had slightly lower ball speed with the old Pro V1, but I reckon, you know, if I was to hit a few more, that might be, you know, more. That might be more of a human factor. I just ripped a couple of the early ones. So the test now is to see, without me swinging out my boots, just to see if I can really catch one. They're still a bit glancy, and that's 160 with slightly higher spin. So, I mean, from this, I would need to hit this as a quick test. You know, we might do a bigger test at some point, probably with a better player, to be honest with you. That's out the heel. But you know, taking into account also that this ball has been sat about for 30 years. That's out the middle, but it's probably a bit spinny. And that's 162, 303. So, you know, based on that test, obviously it's not massively scientific, but based on that test, I think that, you know, this idea of like constant progress with every product launch is false. What's happened in all of these areas is there's a big shift. So major shifts were titanium drivers, massive. It took them a while to get titanium drivers working, but that's the big shift. A titanium head is better, goes further, bigger, hit it harder, don't need to hit the middle of the face as much, so can hit it harder. Pro V1 came along, lower spinning ball off the tee, it changed the game. It's not necessarily progress. Everybody seems to think that longer is better, everything is progress. It's not necessarily progress, because what happened is the big change happened, and then there's a change in the style of play, which takes, you know, 20, 30 years to really play out. And so bigger heads and lower spinning balls created a change in the style of play. And for me, what it did is it took away this beautiful bit of nuance and skill that great players had. You know, we used to have players like Corey Pavin, David Toms, I don't know, off the top of my head, loads of them, who were craftsmen who weren't long hitters, but had amazing short games and could do all sorts of things with the ball. And the great players, you know, a lot of them, if you go back to the 80s, were long, but they were also really great shapers of the ball. And we've lost a little bit of that. I'm not saying that these players today aren't brilliant, and I'm not saying that they couldn't very quickly get their games to a place where they started to have to work the ball more. What I do think is that we want to be asking them those questions. And the only way that we're going to do that is with a softer, higher spinning ball and smaller driver heads. It is as simple as that. Driver heads at 400 cc's, softer, higher spinning ball. What would happen is they'd have to start playing drivers with lower lofts. So really good ball strikers would be able to play drivers with lower lofts to keep the spin off the ball. But as soon as you get a lower loft with a higher spinning ball, it gets way more squirrely. The ball, if you miss one, it's going further offline. So it puts a premium on skill. It'll make golf more entertaining. It'll make golf better for everyone. Any fan of golf, all of these fanboys that are just following what the equipment companies say, they just got no golf IQ. They haven't got a clue. Really what they're doing, because what they're doing is they're just backing the status quo. So they think that players just being able to hit it as hard as they can, not having to control the ball as much, is a good thing. They think that's progress. They're completely wrong. It's not progress. If anyone that knows anything about golf could never see that as progress, because we've taken away a chunk of skill. And the challenge here is to be able to bring back that chunk of skill. And if the golf brands would get on board with that, they would sell more clubs, golf would be more appealing, and it would be better for the game. The problem is they're just protecting the 3 to 5 year view, and that's where the RNA and the USJ have done a great thing, because they need to take a leadership role around the longer term view of the game of golf. It's hard to do because all these big corporations will hold the legal action gun to their head. And also they've got the fanboys on board, you know, the players talk, the fanboys jump in, they follow whatever the players say. These guys are clueless, they don't understand. I'm telling you, there's got to bring the skill back.